While driving, a woman glances at her palm and witnesses a bizarre scene. Her hand has sprouted 10 fingers. Panic sets in, and she loses control of the car, crashing into a snowbank by the roadside. Just when she thinks she is done for, the weirdness strikes again. The story kicks off on a dark night. Sarah is jolted awake from her sleep by a piercing scream. She rushes to her daughter's room and finds 6-year-old Amy having a nightmare. Seeing her daughter terrified, Sarah holds Amy close, whispering words of comfort. Under her mother's soothing presence, Amy's emotions gradually stabilize. Still shaken, Amy describes what she saw in her dream. A monster was chasing her. For some reason, Amy has been having these nightmares frequently lately. However, hearing her daughter's complaints, Sarah doesn't think too much of it. She assumes it is just a bad dream and teaches her daughter a method to distinguish dreams from reality.
Well, you remembered the trick I taught you. You look down at your hand and you count your fingers. You can't count when you're dreaming. You'll never get to 5. That's when I'd know I was asleep and I'd wake myself up.
Listening to her mother's advice, Amy tries counting her fingers. Confirming she only has 5 fingers, she finally looks relieved. Back in her room, Amy lies down to rest, but still anxious, she asks her mother if the finger method really works. Sarah gives her a definitive yes. Seeing her mother's confident gaze, Amy turns off the bedside lamp. But just as the mother and daughter tuck themselves in, the eerie events continue. A strange Sarah lifts the blanket, only to find her daughter is missing. She gets up to search, but finds the room empty. In a daze, Sarah faintly hears her daughter calling out. She follows the voice downstairs and finally finds Amy in the corner of the living room. Amy has her back to her, constantly counting numbers.
Hey, sweetheart. You okay? Hey, you're sleepwalking again.
No, you are.
The terrifying scene scares Sarah. However, when she opens her eyes again, she finds herself back in the living room. It turns out the previous scene was just a dream. Looking at the familiar surroundings, a shaken Sarah wipes the sweat from her forehead. She goes to Amy's room. Looking at the dolls and school bag, Sarah's thoughts are pulled back to a few weeks ago. It turns out Amy actually passed away in a car accident weeks ago. Missing her daughter dearly, Sarah has been dreaming of her constantly, and her mental state has been unstable. Just as Sarah breaks down crying, her mother, Gloria, happens to pass by. Seeing her daughter spacing out in the room again, Gloria tries to comfort her, but ends up startling Sarah. Seeing her daughter so jumpy, Gloria is heartbroken. She can only advise Sarah to try and move on, insisting that Amy's accident wasn't her fault. She warns that if Sarah stays trapped in guilt, she will have a mental breakdown. However, facing her mother's persuasion, Sarah still cannot let it go. She goes downstairs and picks up her paintbrush, painting the scenes she has been dreaming of lately. Looking at the dark shadows on the canvas, Sarah's mind flashes back to the car accident. Sarah is a somewhat famous painter, and her career is on the rise. If nothing went wrong, she would soon become a renowned artist. However, things did not go as planned. Sarah's husband, Michael, is a jerk. He is not only short-tempered, but also frequently abusive towards Sarah. That night, Sarah and Michael got into an argument. The angry husband drove away with their daughter, resulting in the accident. Amy died on the spot, and Michael fell into a deep coma. He is currently being treated in the ICU. Because of the argument that night, Sarah is trapped in deep guilt. She often thinks that if she hadn't argued that day, maybe her daughter wouldn't have met with the accident. Due to Amy's passing, their son, Holden, has also become withdrawn. He spends all day clutching his tablet, playing games, and ignoring Sarah.
Holden, we gotta go. You're gonna be late for school. Grandma packed your lunch, right? Hello? Can you at least text me from that thing if you're not gonna talk to me? Well, okay. You can stay here and catch the bus.
Hearing his mother scold him, Holden reluctantly picks up his school bag. On the way to school, Sarah hopes her son can make more friends and play fewer games, but Holden turns a deaf ear and impatiently opens the car door to leave. After dropping off her son, Sarah goes to her studio. Because of her bad mood lately, Sarah's creative style has become quite dark, especially her works from the past few days. Sarah thought such works would be rejected, but her agent, Anaya, tells her that the response to her paintings has been excellent, and some customers want to buy them. Anaya plans to hold a small exhibition next week to sell them, and asks Sarah to prepare more similar works. A flicker of joy crosses Sarah's face. This is the only good news she has heard recently, and her depressed mood instantly turns around. To celebrate the upcoming exhibition, Sarah prepares a lavish dinner. Seeing her daughter in a good mood, Gloria thinks Sarah has moved on from her guilt and encourages her to stay positive. With her mother's encouragement, Sarah feels even more relieved. Before going to bed, she takes a few sleeping pills. However, that very night, Sarah has another nightmare. She dreams of the time she and Michael took the two children to an amusement park. At the time, her husband took their son elsewhere, while she waited in line with her daughter. Just as Sarah took out her phone to take a picture, Amy was attracted by a white horse nearby and ran off. Fortunately, Sarah reacted quickly and grabbed her daughter, preventing a tragedy. But just as she is checking on her daughter, Michael runs over and starts accusing her.
Are you incompetent? Do you actually listen? It's like you're purposely ignoring me!
The sudden scene scares Sarah, but when she turns around, everything around her eerily vanishes. Confused, she looks back and sees her daughter hanging from a large tree nearby, with a wooden stake in her chest. Seeing her daughter die tragically before her eyes, Sarah completely breaks down. Just then, Michael appears beside her. Looking at the tree branch in front of her, Sarah freezes. It turns out she was sleepwalking and unknowingly walked outside. Luckily, she woke up in time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Sarah, now wide awake, sketches the scene from her dream. But halfway through, she sees a figure flash past in the living room. When she turns around, there is no one there. The successive weird events leave Sarah in a trance. To avoid delaying her work, she decides to see a psychiatrist. However, on the way, she falls into a memory again. It was Amy's birthday, and she had carefully prepared a gift for her daughter. But while the family was happily celebrating, the couple got into a fight over trivial matters. It turns out Michael was having an affair with his secretary. Sarah had discovered it long ago, but for the sake of the children, she chose to swallow her anger. But Michael only gets worse, even flirting with his secretary on his daughter's birthday. Unable to bear it any longer, Sarah brought up divorce. She took out her phone, which contained recordings of Michael's behavior over this period. The phone not only had audio recordings, but also videos of him abusing her. This enraged Michael, who roughly snatched the phone and smashed it with a hammer.
You miserable bitch!
Calm down! Stop!
Never!
Seeing Holden at the door, Michael realized his behavior was inappropriate. He put down the hammer and hurriedly left the house. Arriving at the hospital, Sarah first visits her comatose husband. Although Michael betrayed her, Sarah doesn't blame him too much right now. She just wants a divorce and to leave with the two children. But selfish Michael had forcibly taken their daughter. Just then, Michael's sister Joelle arrives at the hospital. Seeing Sarah, Joelle is full of resentment. Since their separation, Sarah had been avoiding Michael and preventing him from seeing the kids. If Sarah hadn't taken the children away, Michael wouldn't have driven to the suburbs in the middle of the night. Facing Joelle's accusations, Sarah is also furious. They argue in the ward and part on bad terms. Because of this interruption, Sarah doesn't end up seeing the psychiatrist. However, the strange events are far from over. In the evening, the family is having dinner. Seeing her grandson playing games, Gloria is dissatisfied and wants Holden to turn off the game and eat properly. But facing his grandmother's reminder, Holden ignores her. Sarah can't help but scold Holden.
I was with Dad last night.
With Dad?
In my dreams.
What happened?
He tried to take me away again. I didn't want to go.
Holden. Come on out, buddy.
It was a nightmare, Holden.
It felt so real.
It turns out that night, Michael not only wanted to take Amy, but also intended to take their son. But Holden didn't want to leave with his father, so he didn't open the door. Because of this, Holden feels Amy's accident is related to him. If he had stopped his sister or warned his mother that night, Amy wouldn't have been taken away. Sarah goes to her son's room to comfort him, telling him not to feel guilty. Even if he had opened the door that night, he couldn't have stopped Michael and might have been taken away too. Under his mother's persuasion, Holden finally unties the knot in his heart. But just as Sarah prepares to go downstairs to rest, she turns and sees a figure walking into her daughter's room upstairs, and music starts playing from the room. Sarah enters her daughter's room, but no one is there. Just as she is confused, Michael appears again.
Sarah, I miss you so much.
This is a dream.
Looking at her fingers, Sarah realizes this is a dream. She tries to calm down and wake herself up. However, when she pushes the door open, she finds herself at the scene of her husband's car accident. Looking at the broken guardrail, Sarah comes up with a bold idea. She actually steps out, wanting to use extreme fear to wake herself from the dream. Just as she is about to fall, a shout rings in her ear.
Oh God! Holden! Thank you, baby!
Looking at her son beside her, Sarah is dazed. She was just chatting with her son. How did she fall asleep in the blink of an eye? The more she thinks about it, the more wrong it feels. The next morning, Sarah finds psychiatrist Langford and tells her about the strange things she has encountered recently. She constantly falls asleep unconsciously and then performs incomprehensible acts. Hearing Sarah's description, Langford asks if she has taken any medication. Sarah mentions her mother's sleeping pills. Because of Amy's accident, Sarah hasn't been able to rest properly for months and takes her mother's pills every day.
I'm not aware of any medication that can do that safely. But I'm going to refer you to a specialist. They'll do some tests. This could be neurophysiological for all we know. We're going to figure this out, okay? We got this.
Hearing Langford's analysis, Sarah feels disoriented. The doctor suggests Sarah go to the hospital for a detailed checkup to determine if there is a mental issue. Also, she must stop taking the sleeping pills. They are prescription drugs and shouldn't be taken without a doctor's order. Leaving the clinic, Sarah returns home. As soon as she enters, she sees her mother circling the room, holding something strange. It turns out that because of the recent strange events, Gloria went to see a Buddhist practitioner named Bai. The master said there might be something unclean in the house that needs purifying. Watching her superstitious mother, Sarah is helpless and tries to persuade her not to believe in such things. But the eerie events continue. That night, sound asleep, Holden faintly hears a familiar call. He looks up and finds his deceased sister appearing at the window. At Amy's call, Holden unconsciously puts on his coat and goes to the balcony. Seeing her son walk across the balcony, Sarah freezes.
Holden! Wait now! Baby!
Before Sarah can react, Holden leaps from the balcony. Fortunately, the balcony is on the first floor, so Holden isn't injured. Sarah chases after him. As soon as she steps out of the house, she sees her son walking toward the road. Just then, a car approaches. Sarah reacts quickly, grabbing her son just in time to prevent a tragedy. Shaken, Sarah brings her son back home. Gloria thinks the house is unclean and urges Sarah to find someone to look at it. But Sarah resists, believing Holden might be like her, under too much mental stress and sleepwalking. She insists they need a doctor, not a charlatan. However, Sarah is cut off by Holden.
Dad's back.
What?
Amy too. They're both spirits. They're close.
Help me. Please.
When Sarah snaps back to reality, she finds her son and mother are gone. She is alone at the dining table. She thinks she is dreaming again and looks at her palm in panic, but her fingers are normal. She realizes the previous scene was actually a dream. The successive weird events make Sarah toss and turn. The next morning, she prepares to go to the hospital for a checkup. But before she can leave, she receives a call from the hospital. The attending physician says Michael's condition has deteriorated and asks the relatives to come immediately. Sarah takes the family to the hospital. The doctor tells Sarah about Michael's strange condition lately.
Well, I went through his files, and it's been happening since the accident. Every night during REM sleep, sudden, intense bursts of gamma waves. It's really extraordinary in a comatose patient. I've never seen anything like it.
So what does that mean?
Well, sleep and dreams are still the Wild West of consciousness research. But high gamma like that usually means lucid dreaming, taking control of his dreams.
Oh, God. Oh, it happens. It's involuntary.
Hearing the explanation, Sarah recalls her recent experiences. Every time she sleepwalks, it seems related to Michael's mental fluctuations. Could it be that the strange things she encounters are her husband messing with her from behind the scenes? The more she thinks, the more terrified she becomes. In the hospital corridor, Sarah runs into Joelle. Joelle apologizes for her rudeness the other day. During their chat, Joelle mentions she has also encountered strange things, frequently dreaming of Michael and Amy. Learning that Joelle is experiencing similar situations, Sarah gets even more scared. She asks her mother to contact Bai to come to the house for a purification. As soon as Bai enters the house, she senses something unclean. She takes a candle from her bag, lights it, and places it on the table. Then, Bai takes out a piece of white paper and a pencil. She chants a spell and draws the entity in the room on the paper. Sarah looks closely and finds the black shadow Bai drew is identical to the one she saw. Bai tells Sarah the shadow refuses to leave because he wants to take a boy from the house. But before Bai can finish, the lights in the room start flickering. Sarah looks back and sees her daughter appearing on the cabinet. Amy seems to want to warn Sarah, but before she can speak, Michael appears beside Sarah. Luckily, Bai is there. She extends her palm, and Michael is actually scared away. However, just as Sarah thinks Michael has been driven off, she turns back to find Bai's look is off.
Sarah, you're coming with me. You and Holden forever.
Leave my son alone!
No!
Seeing Bai lying on the ground motionless, Gloria hurriedly calls an ambulance. But by the time the doctors arrive, Bai has lost all signs of life. According to the doctor's examination, Bai suffered a sudden stroke, leading to shock and death. Because it was an accident, the family is not implicated. The next morning, Sarah arrives at the studio with her latest works. Because of the dark and unique style, her works win the approval of the guests at the exhibition. A buyer named Lawrence praises Sarah's creativity endlessly and proposes inviting Sarah to participate in a large art exhibition next month. Sarah is overjoyed. However, while chatting with Lawrence, she sees her daughter in the crowd. Sarah makes an excuse and follows Amy to the end of the corridor. But when she gets closer, she finds Amy staring at her with a resentful gaze.
Oh, God.
The sudden scene freezes the guests in place. Reacting, Sarah hurriedly leaves the venue. The continuous, strange events cause Sarah's emotions to collapse. To get some rest, she resorts to taking sleeping pills again. But no matter how many she takes, she can't fall asleep. As soon as there is a noise in the room, she instantly becomes alert. Just as Sarah is about to be tortured to the breaking point, Joelle calls her. She wants Sarah to agree to cut off her brother's oxygen system and let Michael leave this world with dignity. Hearing Joelle's proposal, Sarah hesitates. Although the doctors believe Michael won't wake up, Sarah is unwilling to give up treatment. She asks Joelle for some time to think. In the evening, Sarah contacts Anaya, asking to meet at a bar in the city to talk. However, Anaya thinks she should rest for a few days and contact her tomorrow. Before Sarah can speak, Anaya hangs up. Just then, Sarah discovers several extra fingers on her hand. Fortunately, she reacts quickly, slowing down and stopping the car by the roadside, avoiding an accident. Because of last night's encounter, Sarah changes her mind. She contacts Joelle and her relatives, deciding to cut off Michael's oxygen. The group arrives at the hospital. Looking at her husband on the hospital bed, Sarah still feels sad. After the relatives say their goodbyes, the doctor cuts off Michael's oxygen supply. As the machine slowly stops, the lines on the monitor flatline. Seeing Michael completely devoid of vital signs, Sarah thinks it is all over. That night, to get a peaceful sleep, she ignores the doctor's advice and takes 2 more sleeping pills. However, the eerie events happen again. Deep in the night, in a daze, Sarah hears a strange, thumping sound upstairs. She follows the sound to the 2nd floor and finds it coming from her son's room. Just as she is about to push the door open to check, she sees a man walking out holding her son. Seeing this, Sarah is about to chase them, but turning around, she sees her daughter appearing in the corridor. Amy blames Sarah, saying she killed her father and her. Facing her daughter's accusation, Sarah falls into deep self-blame. Just as she panics and wants to explain to her daughter, Michael appears again. He chokes Sarah, trying to strangle her. In a panic, Sarah fights back and pushes Michael down the stairs.
Sarah! Wake up!
Looking at her mother on the floor below, Sarah is completely stunned. It turns out Sarah was sleepwalking again. Her mother wanted to wake her up, but Sarah mistook her for Michael and pushed her down. The ambulance arrives immediately after the police are called. Because the back of her head hit the corner, Gloria doesn't make it. Facing police questioning, Sarah has to say her mother had a history of sleepwalking and fell from upstairs while doing so. Since there were no signs of a struggle at the scene, the police define Gloria's death as an accident. By the time the police leave, it is already the next morning. Looking at the empty backyard, Sarah can no longer hold it in and starts wailing. In a trance, she remembers the scene from the night of the car accident. It turns out that after negotiation, Michael had agreed to divorce Sarah. But the night before they were to sign the divorce papers, Michael changed his mind. He returned home, wanting his wife to give him another chance. But facing her husband's repeated betrayals and deception, Sarah's heart had gone cold toward Michael. Worried about being hurt during the ensuing argument, Sarah secretly spiked Michael's food with sleeping medication. Her intention was to make her husband feel tired, avoiding harm to herself and the two children. But who knew these very pills would become the catalyst for her daughter's death? Just as Sarah predicted, the couple argued again halfway through the meal.
You're lucky I was so kind, so caring. I gave up everything for you and those kids, my entire existence, and this is what you do to me?
Go to hell.
An angry Michael left the house. Sarah thought her husband wouldn't come back, so she went to the bathroom to wash up. But while she was showering, Michael quietly climbed through the window back into the house. He used the excuse of going to the amusement park to lure his young daughter into the car. Michael originally wanted to take Holden too, but his son delayed opening the door. Left with no choice, Michael drove away with just his daughter. On the road, the medication kicked in. Michael, driving while drowsy and disoriented, caused the tragedy.
I think she put something in my food.
Who did? Mom? Dad took Amy.
What? Amy!
This is the reason Sarah has been unable to let go. She believes she indirectly caused her daughter's death. Because of the guilt, coupled with poor mental health and the continued use of heavy sleep medication, Sarah's mind broke. Looking at her daughter's room, Sarah has mixed feelings. But just as she is blaming herself, the bizarre scene happens again. She is shocked to find herself suddenly inside the car. When Sarah snaps back to reality, she finds herself once again at the cliff where her husband crashed. This time, she doesn't hit the brakes in time.